60 floors below, the city wakes in cold gray, indifferent. At the top of the tower, a pane of glass reflects a silent sky, and behind that glass, a penthouse holds its breath. There are places that keep the echo of what once happened. This room is one of them. The walls are still, the floor is still. It isn't the silence of peace. It's the silence of a room where noise has been forbidden. A hand wipes a slow circle across the cold glass. Then a melody rises, soft. An old song, from a land that burned to ash 30 years ago, though the woman humming it has no idea. Behind her, a shadow moves without a sound. Italian leather stops. A breath. Cedar and old smoke underneath. That song, a pause. What is it? The glass was cold under her hands, cold like the morning. Cold like the city stretched out beyond it, 60 floors down, gray and waking and indifferent to the woman pressing her cloth against its surface. Clara Ritchie wiped a slow circle into the window, then another, and as she worked, she hummed an old song, Sicilian. Her grandmother's song, the one Carmela used to sing in a kitchen that smelled of bread and lemon, a world ago, in a life that no longer existed anywhere except inside Clairgua's chest when she let it. She didn't know what the words meant. She never had. She only knew the melody, the way it rose, the way it fell. The way it sat in her chest like something warm on a cold day, like a hand on your shoulder when you didn't know you needed one. 6 months of cleaning other people's lives. 6 months of invisible work, invisible rooms. This penthouse was the worst of all of them. Not because it was cold. Not because the man who lived here was dangerous, though he was. But because this place felt like it was holding its breath. Like something important had happened here once and left a mark in the air that nobody had bothered to clear. She wiped another circle. And hummed. You missed a spot. She nearly dropped the cloth. The voice came from behind her. Deep. Accented. Something rough underneath the polish. Like silk pulled over something that wasn't silk at all. She hadn't heard him come in. Nobody ever did. Matteo Lombardi moved through his own home like a shadow moves across a wall. There, then gone. Then there again, closer than before, and you never knew which until you turned around, and he was already watching you with those dark eyes that didn't give anything back. I'm sorry, sir, she whispered, and she scrubbed harder. At a section of glass that was already perfect. Because that was what you did. You kept your eyes down. You kept your hands moving. You made yourself small and quiet and easy to overlook, because being overlooked in this apartment was the safest thing you could be. But he didn't move away, that song. A pause. What is it? She swallowed. Kept her gaze on the glass, on her own pale reflection looking back at her. Dark hair escaping the knot at the back of her neck, eyes too wide, hands not quite steady, just something my grandmother taught me. I can stop. If it bothers you, I didn't say it bothered me, and there it was. Something in his voice she couldn't name. Not warmth, exactly. Something older than warmth. Something that had been cold for a long time and had forgotten what the alternative felt like. 3 housekeepers had quit this job before her. 3. They'd all warned her on the way out, faces tight, hands shaking as they gathered their things in the lobby. Matteo Lombardi, 32 years old, beautiful the way a blade is beautiful. Rich the way kings used to be rich, the kind that didn't require explanation or apology, and ruthless. God, the things they whispered about him, the visitors who arrived with fear in their eyes, the armed men stationed at every entrance, the silence of this place, which was not peaceful silence. It was the silence of a room where noise had been forbidden, Clara. He said her name slowly, like he was tasting it, turning it over. When you finish the windows. My office needs attending, she nodded, still didn't look at him. Yes, sir. His shoes turned, Italian leather, polished to a mirror finish. They turned away, and then stopped, the melody, a beat. It's from Palermo, she turned. She couldn't help it, but he was already gone. Nothing left but the scent of him. Cedar and something darker underneath, like smoke from a fire that had been burning for years, and the hammering of her own heart against her ribs, loud enough she was certain he'd heard it on his way out. She stood there for a moment, just stood there. Okay, she thought, okay. It's fine. It's fine. It was not fine. She finished the windows. Quieter now, humming lower, conscious of ears that might be listening from directions she couldn't see. This place was always too quiet. The penthouse felt less like a home and more like a held breath. Other wealthy clients filled their spaces with noise, with guests, with the constant proof of their own importance. Not him. This place was a vault, a man's sanctuary, sealed against everything. When she reached his office, she knocked. even knowing it was empty. Because that was the rule Hawk had told her on her first day. Hawk, the head of security, flat eyes and easy hand resting always near the gun beneath his jacket. A man who had learned to make his stillness feel like a threat. Mr. Lombardi values his privacy, he'd said. You clean what you're told to clean. You don't touch anything else. The office was perfect. It always was. Not a paper out of place on the dark mahogany desk. Not a speck of dust on the leather books lining the walls from floor to ceiling. Shelves that had been built by someone who believed books were meant to be read, not displayed. She dusted in silence, the song dying in her throat. This room felt like a confessional, sacred and secretive and dangerous all at once. She reached for the crystal decanter to polish it, and the door opened. She spun around. Matteo Lombardi stood in the doorway, breaking his own cardinal rule. In his own house, sir. I'm sorry. I was just, sing it again, soft, but it landed like a command. He closed the door behind him, leaned against it, and the room, which had felt small before, felt smaller now. The air thicker, harder to pull into her lungs. She clutched the cloth to her chest like a shield. Like a woman in a fairy tale holding the one thing between herself and something she couldn't name. I don't really sing. In front of people, his eyes narrowed. Just slightly. You've been singing for an hour? I was humming. It's different. She bit her lip the instant the words left her mouth. Too late. Too late to pull them back, but the corner of his mouth lifted, just barely. A ghost of something that might have been a smile, on a face that didn't seem built for them. A face that had been arranged, over many years, into an expression of total control. And here was this small thing, this almost smile. Cracking through anyway. You're not afraid of me. It wasn't a question. But she answered anyway. I'm terrified of you, sir. The almost smile widened, and yet you argue. Her hand trembled. She set the crystal down before she could drop it, set it down very carefully, which was its own kind of admission. I should finish the other rooms, sing for me. And you can go. She stared at him, trying to understand what this was, what game she'd wandered into without a map, the women who cycled through his life, models, actresses, women carved from the pages of magazines, draped on his arm at galas and charity functions, photographed and forgotten within weeks. None of them lasted. None of them mattered. She'd seen the photographs in the gossip columns her agency supervisor forwarded as warnings. And here he was, asking the maid to sing. She took a breath. Unsteady, and she began. The old lullaby flowed out of her slowly, aching, her grandmother's voice echoing somewhere behind her own, the way it always did. The ghost voice, the one that had been teaching Clara things without her knowing for her entire life. She didn't understand the words. She never had. She only understood the feeling underneath them. Loss and longing, and a homeland that lived only in stories now. And something happened to his face while she sang. Something flickered behind those impenetrable dark eyes. The fortress dropped, just for a moment. And for that moment he looked almost human. He looked almost young. He looked like a boy who had heard this melody somewhere long ago, before he became whatever he was now, and had been searching for it ever since without admitting he was searching. When she finished, the silence held its weight. Where did you learn that? His voice was rough in a way it hadn't been before, my grandmother. She came from Sicily. As a girl, what was her name? The question was simple. Nothing about this man was simple, Carmela, she said. Carmela Ricci. Something moved across his face. Fast, dangerous, gone before she could read it. From where in Sicily? Palermo, I think. Why? He straightened, adjusted his cufflinks. Gold stamped with something that looked like a family crest. An old one, the kind that had been carried for generations. You may go, Clara. Return tomorrow as usual. She slipped past him, careful not to brush against his sleeve, and she felt his eyes follow her the whole way out, tracking her movement until the door closed between them and she could finally breathe. Her apartment was small. It was always small, but that night the walls seemed to lean in closer than usual. She should quit. Every nerve in her body said it. Every instinct honed by 6 months of working in rooms where the wrong step could mean something worse than unemployment. But quitting meant no rent. No rent meant no medicine. No medicine meant she couldn't finish the thought. She never could. She just went down the hall instead. Behind a thin door, her brother was sleeping with a machine helping him breathe. Danny, 17 years old. A pair of lungs that had been failing him since before he could walk. A smile that had never failed at all. Not once. Not through any of it. He was the reason she cleaned other people's mansions until her hands cracked and her back ached. He was the reason she stayed in every impossible room she ever found herself in. He was the reason for everything, had been since he was a baby, and she was 8 years old, and their mother had stopped coming home. She'd raised him mostly alone. Their grandmother gone a few years after that, and then it was just the two of them. A girl and a boy, and a mountain of bills that never stopped growing no matter how fast she climbed. She stood in his doorway for a moment, listening to the machine, to the particular rhythm of his breathing that she knew better than her own. Then she went to bed, and didn't sleep. Her phone rang at 11:47 p.m. underworld number. She answered carefully. Miss Ricci, not a question. The voice belonged to Hawk. Your services are required tomorrow evening. A private event. Mr. Lombardi requested you specifically. Her stomach dropped. I don't do events. I'm just the house cleaner. This is not a request, flat. Final. A door closing. A car will collect you at 7. Wear something appropriate. The line went dead before she could argue. Before she could even breathe properly, she called her agency supervisor with shaking hands. Clara, honey, this is good news. The woman actually sounded relieved. Mr. Lombardi has gone through 5 cleaners this year. If he's asking for you by name, you're doing something right. But I don't do events. You do now. Whatever Mr. Lombardi wants, we accommodate. A softer tone then. The one her supervisor used when she wanted to sound kind while still being unmovable. Look, these private jobs pay 3 times your normal rate. One night could cover Danny's medicine for months. Clara sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the wall. 3 times the rate. Months of medicine. Months of breathing. Months of that machine doing what Danny's lungs couldn't quite manage on their own. She couldn't say no. She'd never been able to say no to anything that had Danny's name attached to it. She didn't. The next day passed like held breath. At 7 exactly, a black Audi pulled up to the curb outside her building. Windows tinted to night. The driver, another suited man, another shoulder holster making itself known beneath the fabric. He opened the door without a word, but the car didn't take her to the penthouse. It took her out past the city. To an estate on the edge of everything, behind iron gates and men with earpieces, up a winding drive lined with trees that had been planted generations ago by people who expected the house to stand forever. She clutched her purse in her lap. Her one good dress, black. Job interview dress, cheap fabric, careful ironing, and the optimism of someone who'd needed to make it count and hadn't always managed to's. Hawk met her at the entrance. You're not here to clean, he said before she could ask. Then why am I here? Mr. Lombardi wants you to sing. She blinked. Sing? The Sicilian songs? Follow me. He led her through a house that made the penthouse look modest, marble underfoot cool and pale as a winter morning, crystal overhead catching the chandelier light and fracturing it into 1,000 small rainbows that nobody seemed to notice, paintings on every wall. Not decorative paintings, real ones. The kind that had histories attached to them that the frames couldn't contain, and everywhere, people. Beautiful people, moving through the rooms with champagne glasses and the particular ease of those born into spaces like this. Women in gowns. Men in suits that had never known a rack. Low laughter. The specific music of money that has never had to announce itself. She felt it on her skin, the drugstore lipstick, the sensible shoes, the wrongness of herself in this particular frame. Hawk left her in a small anteroom off the main hall, wood-paneled. A chair she was afraid to sit in, a painting she was afraid to look at too long in case she somehow damaged it with the looking. Wait here. He'll come for you. And then she was alone, pacing, heart working overtime. This was madness. She was a housekeeper, not a performer, not somebody's anything. What did Matteo Lombardi want with her voice? What was she supposed to do with a room full of people who had probably attended actual opera and were going to stand there and watch her hum her dead grandmother's lullaby? The door opened and Matteo walked in, black tuxedo, fitted like a second skin. Dark hair swept back from a face that was, objectively, unfairly designed. Sharp jaw, strong brow, and in this better light she saw it clearly for the first time. A scar along his right cheekbone. A thin silver line that had probably required stitches once, a long time ago, in circumstances she could guess at but wouldn't. It should have made him look brutal. It only made him look like someone who had been through something and come out the other side. Clara, his eyes moved over her, head to foot. You came, did I have a choice? The words left her before she could catch them. She was going to need to do something about that particular reflex, that ghost of a smile again. Appearing and disappearing like a light behind a curtain. We always have choices, he said. Some are simply more painful than others. He crossed to a cabinet, took out a velvet box, set it on the surface and opened it. Sapphires. A necklace of them, blue as deep water, each stone catching the light like a small blue fire. The kind of thing that had a name and a provenance and a value she couldn't have guessed at. Your dress is inadequate for tonight, blunt. Not cruel. Just honest in the particular way of men who have never had to soften honesty because the world has always absorbed it without complaint. This will remedy that. She stepped back. I can't accept that. It's not a gift. It's a costume. For your performance, he moved behind her before she could protest further. His fingers brushed the back of her neck, cool, precise. The weight of the necklace settled against her collarbone, heavy as a hand. Heavy as a claim. Tonight, you represent me, he said. Low, against her ear, you'll sing 3 songs. You'll speak to no one without my indication. You'll remain at my side. Do you understand? The sapphires were cold on her skin. Why me? Why not hire a professional? His hands rested on her shoulders, his breath warm against her hair. Because when you sing, he said, you remind me of home. Something in the way he said it made her shiver from the base of her spine upward. There was hunger in those words, and something older than hunger. Something that had been going without for a long time and had learned to not speak its name. My grandmother used to say, she whispered, that the devil always misses heaven. His laugh was low, without any pleasure in it. Then she would have been right about me. He turned her to face him. Lifted her chin with one finger. One night, Clara. Give me this one night. And your brother's medical bills disappear. Permanently, her blood went cold. How do you know about my brother? I know everything about the people who enter my home. His thumb brushed her lower lip. The gesture was soft, strange, intimate in a way that made her pulse stutter. Do we have an agreement? She should have run. Every rational part of her said so. She was terrified of this man, of this house, of this whole impossible night that had appeared out of nowhere and swallowed her whole. But underneath the fear was something else. Something she didn't have a name for yet. A pull toward the question of him. The mystery of what lived underneath the control. The dangerous curiosity of a woman who had spent her entire life being sensible and was suddenly, unaccountably, not, we have an agreement. Good, he offered his arm. Remember, tonight you're mine. Play your part well. She took his arm, the sapphires heavy at her throat, and she walked out of that small anteroom and into a world she never should have entered. The ballroom went quiet when she began to sing. She stood beside a grand piano that probably had its own biography. Jewels she didn't own resting against her collarbone. And she closed her eyes because if she didn't look at them, she could pretend she was somewhere else. In a kitchen in Queens. 6 years old and small enough to sit on the counter while her grandmother worked at the stove and sang. The first notes trembled, her nerves bleeding through. And then the music took her. It always did this. She'd never understood why. The songs were in a language she'd never learned, from a place she'd never been, about feelings she'd only touched the edges of. But they pulled her in anyway, carried her out of whatever room she was standing in and into somewhere older and quieter. She sang of the sea and the mountains of Sicily. Of love found and lost and found again in a different shape. Of a homeland that lived now only in memory and song. When the last note faded, the silence held for 2 full seconds. Then the applause came. Polite, surprised. The sound of a room that had expected one thing and received something else entirely and wasn't sure what to do with the feeling. Matteo appeared at her side before she'd opened her eyes all the way, his hand settling at the small of her back. Fingers spread. Possessive in a way that would have made her argue about it if she'd had time. You exceeded expectations, he murmured, guiding her forward into the crowd, which parted for him the way crowds part for men they're slightly afraid of. A path opening up without anyone appearing to consciously create it. A silver-haired man stepped into that path older. A suit that cost what most people paid in yearly rent. A smile that reached exactly as far as his calculation required it to, and not 1 millimeter further. Who is your charming companion, Matteo? His accent was heavier than Lombardi's. More of the old country in it, less smoothed away. I don't believe we've been introduced. Clara Ricci. Matteo's voice was glass, perfectly smooth and completely opaque. A family connection. Recently returned from abroad. The lie came off his tongue so easily, it made her wonder how many others she'd already heard and not recognized. The old man's eyes narrowed, studying her face the way you study something that might be valuable or might be counterfeit. And you need to know which before you commit to an opinion, Riki, he said slowly. From Palermo. Perhaps. Matteo's hand tightened imperceptibly against her back. A warning pressed into her spine with exactly the right amount of pressure. Clara doesn't discuss family. Bruno. You understand. The name landed in her like a stone in still water. Don Bruno Greco inclined his head. A movement that looked like deference but wasn't. Like a man bowing while keeping his eyes level, he took her hand, kissed it, held it one beat past the point of politeness. Your voice is extraordinary, Miss Ritchie, he said. Perhaps you might sing at my gathering next month. Clara's schedule is quite full, Matteo's hand at her back steering. If you'll excuse us. He moved her away. Rigid posture, the careful stillness of a man keeping something contained. Once they were clear of the crowd, he leaned close, his lips near her ear. You do not speak to that man, ever. Do you understand me? She nodded, trembling in a way she hoped didn't show. Who is he? A business associate, cold. Someone who uses people the way other men use tools, without particular attachment to what happens to them afterward. Use me how? His dark eyes searched her face, and she saw something there that hadn't been visible before. Something careful, like a man calculating how much truth to offer and in what order. You really don't know who your grandmother was, he said. Not a question. An answer to one he'd been asking himself before she could respond. A woman in red appeared at Matteo's other side, beautiful the way weapons are beautiful. Her hand curled around his arm with practiced familiarity. There you are, she gave Clara one sweeping glance. Comprehensive, dismissive, already moving on. Your father was asking for you, Vivian. Matteo's voice dropped 10 degrees in the space of 2 syllables. I wasn't aware you were invited, she laughed. The sound of champagne glass meeting champagne glass at exactly the wrong angle. Don't be absurd. I'm always invited. Your father adores me. My father tolerates you because of your family connections. Don't mistake tolerance for affection. The smile on Vivian's face changed. Just for a second. Underneath the practiced beauty, something real, hurt, genuine and deep, hardening immediately into something much colder and much more dangerous. And who is this little songbird? Her gaze settled on Clara, pinning her. A new project? Clara is my guest, Matteo said, each word placed with care. Which is more than I can say for you this evening. Vivian's face went white, then a color that had nothing to do with her dress. You'll regret this, she said quietly. Publicly humiliating me, she turned, walked away. Her red dress a wound moving through the monochrome crowd. Clara watched her go. Something cold settling in low. The particular feeling of watching something break that can't be repaired. Of having become, without choosing it, part of someone else's damage. Who was that? No one important, Matteo said, but his eyes followed Vivian across the room for just a moment too long. And he didn't look like a man who believed his own words. He took her out to the terrace after that, away from the lights and the music and the watching eyes, the night air cool against her heated skin. Fairy lights in the hedges below, thousands of small warm points against the dark. They were nearly alone out here, nearly. She could see the security men stationed at the edges, still and watchful, their eyes never stopping their slow sweep. For a long moment, Matteo said nothing. He stood at the stone railing and looked out at the dark garden below. And when he finally spoke, something had changed in his voice. The armor had thinned, just slightly. Just enough to hear the difference, your grandmother. Carmela Ritchie. Was she married to a man named Antonio? Clara blinked. Yes, my grandfather. He died before I was born. How did you? Because Antonio Ricci was my father's consigliere. He turned to face her, his most trusted advisor, before he vanished, 30 years ago, when his entire family was presumed dead in a fire that burned their estate to the ground. The terrace seemed to tilt. That's impossible. My grandparents came to America. They ran a restaurant in Queens. My grandfather died of a heart attack. That's always been the story, a convenient story, no accusation. Only the weight of someone who had known the truth for a long time and waited to find the right moment for it. One that kept your family alive for 3 decades. Alive from what? Her voice had risen. He pressed one finger gently to her lips. The gesture was so unexpected that she went silent immediately. Not here, he said quietly, glancing back toward the house. This changes everything, Clara. You cannot return to your apartment tonight. Fear shot through her, bright and electric. My brother is being collected as we speak, brought somewhere safe. With his medication, everything he needs. This is insane. She backed against the railing. I'm a housekeeper. I pay my bills. I clean your toilet. You've made some kind of terrible mistake. His laugh held no humor. The only mistake was your grandmother believing she could hide forever. He stepped closer. His hand rose to the spot just behind her right ear, not touching. Just indicating, the Carmela Ricci I'm thinking of had a birthmark. A small crescent moon. Right here, Clara's hand flew to the exact spot where her own birthmark lay, hidden under her hair. The one her grandmother had, and her mother, and now her. The one she'd never thought about once in her life. His eyes darkened. So it's true, this is. Her voice broke. You can't just take us. Because of some feud I didn't know existed. Because of something that happened before I was born. I'm trying to protect you. His fingers brushed her cheek. Surprisingly gentle for a man who moved through the world the way he did. Your grandmother never told you why she really left Sicily. Did she? She shook her head. Eyes burning. She said they left for a better life. A normal immigrant's story. She said she left because she was smuggled out. After men came for her family in the night, with fire and guns posted at every exit. She left because someone believed her husband was innocent and was willing to stake everything on that belief. Her knees weakened. She saw a movement then at the far edge of the garden. A figure retreating into shadow. Watching, Matteo saw her see it. His whole body shifted, angling between her and the dark without appearing to think about it. Like a reflex that had been trained into him so long ago it had become instinct, hawk, quiet. Controlled, his security chief materialized from nowhere. We're leaving. Through the back. Car around now. What about the other guests? Your father? Family emergency. Make my apologies. His arm wrapped around her waist, steering her down the terrace steps, away from the lights, onto a path that led off into the dark. My things, she said weakly. Danny's records, his backup medication. We'll send someone. Nothing there matters more than this moment. A different car waited, sleeker. Windows so black they looked solid. Matteo slid in beside her. The door closed with a soft, final sound. Like a vault being sealed from the outside, the driver pulled away without being told where to go. They already had a plan. This had never been improvised. This had been waiting for her, shaped and ready before she'd even known it existed. The drive went long, past the city and into dark roads and darker trees. How long have you known? She asked, the dark between them holding the question gently. About my grandmother, I suspected when I heard you sing. That lullaby belongs to a specific region. Passed through certain families across generations, his hand found hers in the darkness, warm and steady in a way she hadn't expected. When you said her name, I was almost certain. Tonight was meant to confirm it, by parading me in front of him. That man, Bruno, by giving him enough rope, his grip tightened. You saw his face when he heard your name. He knew immediately she had seen it, the way the old man's eyes had sharpened, the way the casual mask had slipped for just a fraction of a second before being replaced. By tomorrow, he'll have confirmed his suspicions, Matteo said. By tomorrow night, he would have sent men. I had to move first. Why would he care about me? I have nothing. I'm nobody. He was quiet for a moment, choosing words with the care of a man who knew that words once released couldn't be recalled. The Ricci family controlled significant territories in Sicily, trade routes, port access, arrangements built over generations. When they were believed dead, all of it was divided. The Greco family took the largest share, so if a Ricci heir appeared, everything built on those territories becomes contested. Every arrangement, every claim. He paused. Under the old codes, blood is the only argument that matters. A laugh escaped her, slightly hysterical. She pressed her hand over her mouth to stop it. I clean toilets for a living. I have a community college degree and enough medical debt to purchase a small car. I don't want territories, not anymore, he said, simply. Finally, the car turned down a private road. A gatehouse. Armed men checking the vehicle with quiet efficiency before waving them through. Where are we? My private residence. I thought the penthouse was your residence. The penthouse is for business. This is home. The house rose out of the trees. Stone. Old. Warm light in the windows. Nothing like the showpiece she'd expected. Nothing like the image she'd built of him from cleaning his professional surfaces. This was a place someone actually lived in. A place that held things that mattered. An elderly woman waited at the entrance, severe-faced until she saw Matteo, and then something in her face shifted. The way a landscape changes when the light changes. "You're late," she scolded in heavily accented English. "The boy arrived 20 minutes ago. He's frightened, Danny." Clara was already moving, pushing past Matteo toward the door. "Where is he?" "East Wing," the woman said. "I gave him something to help him sleep. His own medication." He was struggling to breathe from the anxiety. Clara turned on Matteo. But the fight drained out of her before it properly formed. Because the woman's eyes were kind. And the medicine had been Danny's own. And the East Wing was a direction she could move in. "Take me to him. I'll take her," the old woman said. "The boy needs a familiar face." "Thank you, Rosa." Matteo touched the woman's shoulder. An unconscious gesture. The kind you make with people you've known long enough that tenderness doesn't require announcing. "Show Miss Ritchie to her brother." Then to her room, as Rosa led her through the house, all warm wood and old carefully chosen things. Clara glanced back once. Matteo stood watching her go, and his face for just a moment held something she hadn't seen there before. Something troubled, something almost lost. The face of a man caught in a situation he'd engineered and was only now fully understanding the weight of. She found Danny sleeping. The breathing machine set up beside his bed exactly as it was at home. Every setting correct. His medication arranged on the nightstand. Someone had brought his pillow, and the worn stuffed bear he'd had since childhood, the one he claimed was ironic. She sank into the chair beside him, brushed the dark hair from his forehead. So like hers. So like their grandmothers in the photograph she'd never seen. Was any of it true? Were they really the descendants of a Sicilian crime family that had been burned out of existence 30 years ago? It seemed impossible, but the speed of tonight, the efficiency. The fact that these people had collected her brother's specific medication from an apartment they'd never been given access to. That spoke of preparation. Of resources. Of reasons that went very deep and very far back. "Your room is across the hall," Rosa said from the doorway. Her voice quiet. "Clothes in the closet, your size. If you need anything in the night, press the intercom. Someone is always awake. We're prisoners here, aren't we?" The old woman clicked her tongue. If Matteo wanted prisoners, he has less comfortable accommodations. "No. You are protected, is it true?" "About my grandmother?" Rosa hesitated, her weathered face holding two things at war with each other. "It is not my story to tell, a pause that carried years in it. But I will say this. When Matteo spoke your name tonight, I knew. You have Carmela's eyes. And her spirit?" The old woman's voice softened on the name. "More of her than you know." Clara stared at her. "You knew my grandmother." But Rosa was already turning away. Already retreating from the question before it could become an answer she wasn't ready to give. "Sleep," she said. "Tomorrow will require your strength." And then Clara was alone with her sleeping brother. The machine breathing its steady rhythm. The night pressing against the windows. She crossed to look out at the moonlight on the pines. Somewhere beyond those trees was Chicago. Her apartment, the life she'd had this morning, which already felt like something that had happened to a different person, in a story she'd been told secondhand. And the thing that frightened her most, as she stood there in the dark, wasn't the danger. Wasn't the men with guns or the name that apparently made old men's eyes go sharp and cold. It was the voice underneath all of it, small and certain and in her grandmother's language, which she didn't speak but somehow understood. "This is where you were always going. Outside, beyond the gates, beyond the trees. A car sat dark on the road, engine off. A man inside with a phone already pressed to his ear. "It's her," he said. Greco was right. "It's her," and hung up. And the night went very, very quiet. Morning arrived the way mornings do after impossible nights, slow. Then suddenly, all at once, Clara opened her eyes to silk curtains she didn't recognize, cream-colored, shifting slightly in air from a vent she couldn't find. 3 seconds of pure blankness. Then everything came back. She sat up, silk pajamas. She didn't remember putting them on. At some point, the exhaustion had simply taken her, pulled her under without ceremony, and she'd let it. The room was beautiful in the careful way of spaces that have been designed by someone who understood comfort as a form of power. Cream walls, blue accents. A window showing pale early sky, a knock at the door. Rosa entered with a breakfast tray. Berries, yogurt, pastries that smelled of butter and something warm. Coffee in a silver pot that reflected her face back at her, slightly distorted. "Your brother is already in the garden," Rosa said. eating everything that doesn't move, and asking Carlos detailed questions about the vintage cars. Clara almost smiled. Almost, Mr. Lombardi? Left early. He asked that you make yourself comfortable and said he would return by afternoon. After Rosa left, Clara sat with the coffee, warming her hands, and tried to organize what she actually knew. Her grandmother, the lullaby, a massacre 30 years ago, a family presumed dead, a man named Antonio who had been someone important's most trusted person, a birthmark like a crescent moon behind the right ear, and Matteo Lombardi, who had known all of this before she did, who had positioned her like a piece on a board without telling her the name of the game. She was going to need to talk to Danny, who was apparently already discussing vintage automobiles with the estate staff, because of course he was. The garden was sun-soaked, and still when she found him, Danny sat at a wrought iron table with a plate that had recently held pancakes, and the expressioncy of a boy who had stumbled into something extraordinary and was choosing, very deliberately, not to examine it too hard in case the examination made it disappear. "This place," he announced before she'd sat down. "The library has a pool table and 3 gaming systems, and Rosa makes the best pancakes I have ever put in my mouth. I just want to say that up front. Danny, I know. Are you okay?" "Actually okay?" His smile dimmed the smallest amount. The way it always did when she asked the real question instead of the polite one. "I was scared when they showed up," he said. "But then Hawk explained that you were in danger and we needed to move. And then we got here and they had all my equipment set up exactly right. The pressure settings, the filters, all of it." He shrugged one shoulder. "Hard to assume murder when someone has correctly calibrated your nebulizer." "This is serious, I know it is," he said it simply, without the deflection. At 17, he was sometimes more settled than she gave him credit for. But the way I see it, if somebody's coming for us because of some old family thing, I'd rather have the scary guys with guns on our side. She spread her hands on the table. "Rosa knew our grandmother." "Yeah." He leaned forward, interested immediately. "She said Carmela was the prettiest girl in the whole village, that everyone was in love with her." He tilted his head. "Did you know any of this? The family stuff?" "No." A pause. "I still don't entirely believe it. Seems real to me." He gestured at the estate around them. The stone walls, the garden, the guards keeping their careful distance. Hard to fake all this. We don't know what they actually want from us. We need to be careful." He was quiet a moment. "Watching a bird land on the fountain's edge, consider the situation and fly away. Mr. Lombardi came by this morning," he said. "Before you were up," her head snapped up. "He came to see you, apologized for the abrupt move. Asked if everything was set up right medically. Stayed about 10 minutes. Danny paused, picking at the edge of his empty plate. "Then he said something about confirming our family connection and arranging for our long-term security. Long-term," the word sat cold. "We can't stay here indefinitely. Why not, honestly?" He said it without irony. "Just laid it out there. Our apartment is falling apart, Clara. You work yourself into the ground cleaning other people's houses and come home too tired to eat properly. I sit there feeling useless and costing money we don't have. Don't. It's true, and we both know it." His voice was quiet. Not angry, not self-pitying. Just factual. The way he'd gotten about his own situation over the years, which was sometimes more painful than the anger would have been. What if this is a chance? An actual chance to stop just surviving? She didn't have an answer, because part of her, the part she'd been carefully not listening to since last night, was thinking the same thing. "Also," Danny added, and his voice changed slightly, "I've seen how Mr. Lombardi looks at you." Heat moved up her neck. "Don't. I'm sick," he said. "Not blind. Rosa says he's never brought anyone to this house before. Not family, not anyone." He tilted his head. "She also says his father was cold. That Matteo became like him to survive. But that there's still, Rosa talks too much. Rosa is invaluable. Don't silence her." He stood carefully the way he always moved when his chest was tight. Negotiating with his own body. "I'm going to go find Carlos and ask about the Lamborghini." "Absolutely not. I'm just going to ask," he said. "I'm not going to drive it. Danny, I'm 17, not 12. He picked up his plate. "Think about what I said, okay? Sometimes the most terrifying option is actually the safest one." She watched him walk away, her kid brother, wiser than she deserved. She sat alone for a long time in that garden, the sun moving its slow arc, the fountain running, the guards keeping their respectful distance, until a suited man appeared at the garden door. "Miss Ritchie, Mr. Lombardi has returned. He's requesting your presence in the study." The study was all warm wood and leather, and the particular smell of books that have actually been read. Matteo stood at the window when she entered, his back to her. Something in the set of his shoulders that she was beginning to recognize. The particular tension of a man carrying something he hasn't put down in a long time. He'd changed. Dark slacks. A charcoal shirt with the sleeves rolled back. No jacket, no cufflinks. The closest thing to unguarded she'd seen on him, which still wasn't very unguarded at all. "You slept," he said without turning. Not a question, as well as expected. For someone told their life was a lie, he turned. A small shift at the corner of his mouth. Different from the one at the party. This one had something warmer in it. Fair. He gestured to the chairs near the fireplace. "Sit, please. What I have to show you takes some time." She sat on the edge of the armchair, arms folded, not quite ready to sink into the comfort being offered. He placed a leather portfolio on the table between them. "These were in my father's private safe. I found them after he died. Last year," she opened it slowly. Photographs. Letters in Italian, some barely legible, ink faded with years. Newspaper clippings yellowed at the edges, the paper becoming fragile. One photograph stopped everything. A family gathered on the steps of a villa in full Sicilian sunlight. 20 people at least, laughing. Together. The way families are together when they don't know they're running out of time. The particular ease of a moment that doesn't know it's the last of its kind at the edge of the group. A young woman. Dark hair, sharp eyes. A smile that spread too wide for the careful composure that was clearly expected of her. A woman who found things funny in rooms where she was supposed to be serious. That's her. "Clara," I said, her voice smaller than she intended. "That's my grandmother. She's so young, 19. That was taken at the Ricci family estate in Palermo. 1989, Matteo's voice was careful. The last gathering before the attack, Clara's eyes moved across the faces, stopped on a toddler held in the young woman's arms. Dark curls, round cheeks. One small hand reaching toward the camera. "Is that your mother?" 2 years old, the word landed, her mother, who had died when Clara was 8, who had never talked about Sicily, who had held things the way people hold things when the weight of them is too much to set down but also too much to carry. "What happened?" Her voice was steady. "Barely. Tell me all of it." Matteo sat across from her, elbows on his knees. The posture of someone who was going to say something true and knew it would have weight. "Antonio Ricci was my father's consigliere, his most trusted man. They had been together since they were young, and my father trusted him more than anyone. More, perhaps, than he trusted himself." He paused. Then the Greco family made their move. Bruno's father, Dominic, accused Antonio of betrayal, of feeding information to federal authorities. My father didn't believe it, but others in the organization did. Fear moves faster than truth. Always Clara stared at a headline in Italian. The number was clear regardless of language. 23 dead. Dominic Greco ordered the attack on the estate. The fire was set deliberately. Men were posted at every exit. It was designed to look like a tragedy. It was designed to end the Ricci name completely. Every branch, every heir. But my grandparents survived, because my father helped them. He arranged documents, passage to America, new identities. He told no one. Not his lieutenants, not his family, not me. A long exhale. I found a letter in his safe, written in his own hand, addressed to no one and to everyone. The confession of a man who had carried a secret for 30 years and needed it to exist somewhere outside himself before he died. Clara sat very still, the fire in the grate. A bird outside calling once and then going quiet. He believed Antonio was innocent until his last breath, Matteo said. He believed Dominic Greco fabricated the evidence, that the entire thing was engineered to seize Ricci territories. Do you have proof of that? Something careful crossed his face. Your grandmother left it for you. Clara blinked. What? He leaned forward. The songs she taught you. They are not simply lullabies. They're a code, passed through the women of certain Sicilian families for generations. A way of carrying secrets that no fire could destroy. No safe could be forced open. Because the information lived inside the music itself, she thought of 6-year-old Clara sitting at a kitchen counter in Queens. Her grandmother's voice warm and steady, and teaching her words in a language she never explained. Songs that Clara had sung for 20 years without understanding a syllable. The second song, Matteo said. The one about the sea and the lighthouse. The third verse contains coordinates. Coordinates to what? A safety deposit box in Zurich. Your grandmother opened it in 1994. 2 years after settling in Queens. Inside, according to my father's letter, is documentation, evidence, proof that Dominic Greco fabricated every accusation against Antonio Ricci. Clara set down the photograph. Her hand was not entirely steady. She hid evidence inside a lullaby, she said softly. Inside a song she taught a 6-year-old girl who didn't even know what language it was in. She was protecting you, Matteo said, while making sure the truth survived regardless of what happened to her. Or she knew, Clara said, that someday someone would come who needed it, and she was making sure I'd be ready to use it. The words hung between them. And he looked at her the way he'd looked at her a few times now. Like something he hadn't expected to find, like a thing that kept surprising him, and he wasn't entirely sure what to do about that. I want to hear all the songs, she said. In order, the music room had high ceilings and the hush of a space built for sound. Clara sat at the piano bench. Not to play, just because she needed something solid under her. Something that wouldn't shift. She closed her eyes, pulled the songs up from the deep place. The place where Carmela still lived, where the kitchen still smelled of bread and old radio music and lemon. She sang the first song, all the way through. Matteo sat across the room and listened with his whole body. Still as the walls, then the second. And in the third verse, she stopped. There, she opened her eyes. Those 3 lines. The syllables don't match the rest of the verse. I never noticed before. But now that I'm listening for it, sing them again. She did, and he wrote. Numbers taking shape on paper. A sequence assembling itself. When they finished, he looked at what they had. I'll send someone to Zurich tonight. They'll be at the bank when it opens. The box should reach us within 48 hours. Clara nodded, her throat tight in a way she couldn't fully account for. She hid it so well, she said quietly. 30 years, carrying this. And she never said a word. She trusted you, Matteo said. She just trusted you at a distance. Through time, a pause, or she trusted the right song with the right person, Clara said. And let them find each other when the time came. He looked at her again in that particular way. And this time she held his gaze instead of looking away. For once she didn't look away. The 48 hours passed. Then his phone rang. She watched through the half-open door as he answered it in the hallway. Watched the way his stillness changed quality. The way a man becomes very quiet when something has gone very wrong, and he's deciding how to absorb it. He came back in and closed the door. The box, he said, was empty. She stared. Empty. Someone reached it first. Someone who had the coordinates before we did. His jaw was tight, not with anger, with something underneath anger, something older. Someone inside. He made one call. Short. And 10 minutes later, Hawk walked into the study. Woz walked in. 2 men flanking him. His face arranged into the blankness of someone deciding in real time how much to admit. Matteo stood at the desk. He didn't sit. He didn't move. He just looked at Hawk the way you look at something you believed in that has turned out to be something else entirely. How long? He said. Silence. How long, Hawk? A pause that answered the question before any words did. 8 months, Hawk said. The room seemed to contract. 8 months. A decade of trust. 8 months of feeding information to the other side while standing at Matteo's shoulder, the coordinates, sent to Greco the night you extracted them. He had a man at the bank before it opened. Hawk's voice was flat. Not apologetic. Just facts being stated, like a report being filed. The documents are in Greco's possession. Something moved behind Matteo's eyes. The fortress wall, cracking. The young man inside it, for just a moment, visible, tired. Quietly devastated by the specific kind of loss that comes from being wrong about someone you chose to trust. Then the wall sealed itself back. Harder than before, lower level, Matteo said to the 2 men. Keep him there. As Hawk was escorted out, he stopped at the door, turned his head, and looked not at Matteo, at Clara. His expression for a fraction of a second held something that had no business being on the face of a man who had just been revealed as a traitor. It looked like an apology. Then he was gone. Clara stood in the room with a man who had just lost something that doesn't come back. She didn't say she was sorry. That would have been a small word for a large wound. Instead, she crossed to the chair nearest to his and sat down. Said nothing, just sat there. He stood with his back to her for a long time. Then he pulled out the chair beside hers and sat down. They didn't speak for 10 minutes. Maybe more. The fire went on doing what fires do. The room held them. My father said loyalty was the only currency worth having, he said finally. Low. Almost to himself. and the only one that could be perfectly counterfeited. He sounds like a complicated man, he was, a long exhale. Right about almost everything. Except how long it takes to discover you were wrong about someone. Clara looked at her hands. Is this because of me? Did my appearing cause this? No, fast. The sharpest thing he'd said in an hour. Don't do that. Greco had a reason to move against you. Greco has been looking for a reason since the day I took over. You're not the cause. You're just the timing, she nodded. It helped, a little, so the box is empty. He has the documents. What do we have? Something shifted behind his eyes, behind the exhaustion, behind the specific grief of betrayal. Something that was edging toward determination. We have the songs, he said. And Greco doesn't know how much else your grandmother hid in them. She met his gaze. Then we need to find out what else she left me. They spent the afternoon in the music room, going through every song, every verse, every syllable that sat slightly wrong in its context. Pulling at threads Carmela had woven into the music 30 years ago in a kitchen in Queens, protecting secrets she'd carried across an ocean. It was slow work, quiet work, the kind that requires a particular patience. The patience of people who have stopped rushing because they understand that some things only reveal themselves when you're willing to wait. And something else happened in that room. Something that didn't announce itself. Matteo started telling her things, small things, offered carefully the way you offer something fragile to someone you're not yet certain can hold it. He told her his father had been a cold man, capable of a kind of love but not comfort, a man who had decided, very early, that tenderness was a liability and had raised his son in that conviction. He told her he had learned to become unreachable. Because what cannot be touched cannot be used against you. He told her that the first time he heard her singing in the penthouse, something had happened that he hadn't been prepared for. A hairline fracture in something he'd believed was solid. Why are you telling me this? She asked. He considered it honestly. Because you stayed, he said. This afternoon, after Hawk, you stayed. Of course I stayed, you didn't have to. She looked at him for a moment. Neither did your father. When he saved my grandmother, something changed in his face. She watched it happen, the small shift that occurs when a person suddenly sees the shape of the thing they've been carrying and recognizes it for what it actually is. She understood it. She carried the same shape. Just in a different pocket and for different reasons. Later that evening, Danny appeared at her side in the East Wing corridor. The gleam in his eye that meant information recently acquired. Okay, he said. So Rosa told me something. Rosa needs to. Rosa is invaluable. Don't silence her. He fell into step beside her. The woman from the party. Vivian. She's been calling. Asking questions about who you are. Why you're here. Clara stopped walking. She's also been seen outside the East Gate. Danny continued. Twice. In the last 24 hours. Why would she? Because she's furious. Simply. And people who are furious make choices they'd never make otherwise. Vivian. The woman Matteo had dismissed in front of an entire room. Publicly. Without apparent awareness of the cost. A woman with connections in this world. Who had access to its edges and knew how they worked. An angry woman with nothing left to manage carefully. That was not a small thing. I'll tell Matteo, Clara said. Already did, Danny replied. This morning. While you were asleep, she stared at him. I'm 17, he said. Not 8. But telling Matteo didn't change what happened next. Because some things are already moving before you can see them coming. It was the following afternoon. Low golden light coming through the windows at the sideways angle that meant the day was giving up on itself. Clara was in the garden when Rosa came. The old woman's face. She'd never seen Rosa's face look like that. Danny, she said, just the name. And Clara was already moving, East Wing, his room. The door open, the breathing machine still running, humming to an empty room, his bed, empty, his bear still on the pillow. Because Danny hadn't gone anywhere voluntarily since he was 4 without that bear, however ironic he claimed the relationship was. The window. Open. The latch turned in a way it shouldn't have been turned. Clara stood in the center of the empty room. And the fear that moved through her was not the bright electric fear from the party, from the terrace, from the car. This was different. Cold and old and absolute. She walked to the hallway. Her footsteps very even, her face very still. The stillness of someone holding everything in place by force of will alone. She found Matteo in the command center, already surrounded by his people, already in motion. His eyes found hers the moment she appeared in the doorway. He already knew. She could see it. Greco's men, he said. North perimeter. During the shift change, Vivian gave them the timing, Clara said. Yes. And the east wing layout. His voice was controlled, but underneath it, she could hear the cost of saying the next words. She gave them both. Clara nodded once. Where is Hawk? Still below. I want to talk to him, Clara. He looked at me when they took him out. It wasn't guilt and it wasn't contempt. I need to know what it was. A long pause. Then Matteo nodded to one of his men. The room where they were keeping Hawk was functional. Not comfortable. Not brutal. A room for waiting and thinking, which is its own kind of discomfort. Hawk sat with his back straight and his hands loose on his knees. He looked up when Clara entered. Alone. She'd insisted on that. They took Danny, she said. I know. You know who they'll use him against? Yes, she stood in the center of the room, looking at him, reading what she'd seen in his face in the doorway. That fraction of a second. Why did you look at me like that? She asked. When they walked you out, long silence. Long enough she thought he'd decided not to answer then, because I didn't want you to think it was about you. What I did, it wasn't. It was never about you. Then what? His jaw moved. Once, Greco has my mother, he said, has had her. For 9 years. From the day I joined Lombardi's organization. Insurance, he called it. Her well-being in exchange for access to the inside. Clara was very still. 9 years. He took her when I started here. Said he'd maintain the arrangement as long as I was useful. Information for her safety. Hawk's voice remained flat. The voice of someone who has described something so many times inside their own head that all the texture has worn off it. It was simple. That old. That long the silence in the room had texture now. Does Matteo know? Not the truth. Not all of it. She looked at him for a long time. Not at the betrayal. Not at the 8 months. But at the weight it had taken to do what he'd done. Year after year. Day after day. Standing at the shoulder of a man you respected while quietly destroying everything he was building. That was its own kind of suffering. If you were out of here, she said carefully. Could you get to Greco's facility? Where they're keeping Danny? His eyes sharpened. The flatness cracked just slightly. Clara, answer the question. Yes, measured. I know every inch of how Greco operates. The layout, the rotation, the timing. 9 years of watching, she nodded, turned toward the door. Why would you trust me? He asked. From behind her, she stopped. Didn't turn back because you looked at me like you were sorry, she said. Men who are truly on the other side don't look sorry. They look satisfied, she walked out. The conversation with Matteo was fast and loud. For about 90 seconds, absolutely not. He knows the facility. He sold us out. He had leverage against him, his mother. 9 years, the longest pause she'd ever heard from him. 9 years, Matteo said. Danny has a machine that helps him breathe, she said. Quiet, no drama. Just the fact of it, clear and simple. He doesn't have it right now. Every hour matters. Matteo looked at her for a long time. If this goes wrong, then it goes wrong. But we're not doing nothing. And we're not going without every advantage available. He turned away, ran a hand through his hair, undid all the careful arrangement of it in one gesture. The gesture of a man thinking hard and not caring what he looked like while doing it. Then he turned back. We move at midnight, he said. And somewhere below them, a door unlocked. And Hawk stood up. The night came down heavy. Full dark by 8, a sky without stars. The particular dark that feels intentional. Clara sat alone in the music room, not to plan, not to decode, just to sit with Carmela's songs one more time before everything changed. To be with her grandmother for a moment in the only way left available, she sang the first song, quietly. To no one, you hid the truth in a song, she thought. You carried it across an ocean and taught it to a little girl who didn't understand the words and never questioned why she was learning them. You trusted her with everything and told her nothing. And she sang them for 20 years without knowing what they were, but she knew the melody. That was enough. That was what you counted on. She sang the second, and in the third verse, the coordinates she now knew by heart, the empty box. The evidence already gone, already in Greco's hands, but there was a fourth song, one she hadn't thought about in years. Carmela had taught it to her last, when Clara was 9 years old, the year before the old woman died. Clara had thought it was just the final lullaby. The last one, the closing one. She began it. Verse 1. Verse 2, third verse. Her breath stopped. The pattern was there. Different syllables. Different arrangement. Not Zurich, Geneva. A second box. A second set of documents. A backup that Hawk had never known about. because Hawk had only ever been given what was enough to make him useful. Because Carmela had lived long enough in fear to understand that one hiding place was never sufficient. Because a woman who had survived what her grandmother survived didn't put everything in one place, the second box. Carmela had hidden it only in the song, in the fourth song, which no one had asked about because no one had known to ask, except the granddaughter who had been singing all of them for 20 years without understanding a word. Clara sat in the music room of a house that wasn't hers. Her brother somewhere in the dark, her grandmother's voice in her ears. A man down the hall who made her feel things she hadn't planned for and didn't know quite what to do with. And she felt it then. For the first time. Not the weight of the Ricci name, the shape of it. What it had always actually been, not a burden, not a target, not a legacy built on blood and old men's needs and 30 years of grief, a choice. That her grandmother had made every day, to carry the truth forward, to trust it to the next woman, to believe that somewhere down the line, when the time came, the right person would know what to do with it. Clara stood up. She knew what to do with it. She went to find Matteo. She told him about Geneva at 11:47, 13 minutes before midnight. He was standing over blueprints of Greco's facility when she walked into the command center. Exit points in red, entry points in blue. The whole thing looking like a map of somewhere people went in and didn't always come back out. She told him. The fourth song. The pattern Carmela had buried so deep that 30 years of being hunted hadn't found it. A second box in Geneva, a complete backup, that Hawk had never known about, that Greco had never been told about, that existed only inside a melody a 9-year-old girl had been taught in a kitchen in Queens. Matteo went completely still. The room kept moving around him. Men checking weapons. Hawk standing to one side with his arms crossed and his face carefully neutral. Rosa. Somewhere in the house doing what she did when she was frightened, which was to find things to fix. But Matteo went still as stone. "You're certain," he said. "I'm certain. You found this tonight, an hour ago." He looked at her for a long moment, and something moved behind his eyes, something beyond surprise. Something that looked like a man understanding that what he'd thought was a losing hand was actually something else entirely. That the game was different from the one he'd thought he was playing. "This changes how we approach tonight," he said. "If Greco doesn't know about Geneva, he thinks he holds everything," she said. "He thinks the box is empty and we're finished. Let him think that." All the way to the end, Hawk made a sound across the room. Not quite a laugh. Not quite not. "She's right," he said. "Confidence makes people careless. Greco is very confident right now." Matteo looked at him. The long look of a man deciding how much he was willing to trust something that had already broken his trust once. The calculation visible in his face, which was usually so opaque. "Danny first," he said finally. "The boy comes out first. Everything else comes after that." "Danny first," Hawk agreed. Clara nodded once. And midnight arrived. They went in dark and quiet, 3 vehicles on back roads, no lights, the October, cold smelling of dead leaves and approaching weather. Clara in the second vehicle, with Matteo beside her, his hand resting on his knee close enough to hers that she could feel the warmth without touching. Neither of them looked at the other, but she was aware of him the way you're aware of a fire in a dark room, by the heat, by the light it throws on everything else. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "Quiet." The third time he'd said it, and yet, she said. The third time she'd answered the same way. He didn't say it again. The facility was on the edge of what used to be industrial. Warehouses converted and reconverted until their original purpose was a memory. The kind of place that looked abandoned from the road and wasn't. Hawk knew every rotation, every camera blind spot, every gap in the coverage that 9 years of careful observation had mapped. They moved through it like water finding its way through rock. Inevitable. Quiet. They found Danny on the second floor, in a room that was functional and nothing more. A cot, a chair, a window looking at a wall. He was sitting upright when the door opened, face pale. Breathing audible in the particular, labored way Clara knew better than her own name. The way that meant the machine wasn't there, and his lungs were working harder than they should have to for every breath. He looked up, saw her, and the face he made, just for 1 second. Before the brave expression settled into place, the one he wore to protect her from knowing how scared he'd been. That 1 second nearly took her out at the knees. "Hey," he said. "Hey." She crossed the room, knelt in front of the cot, put her hands on his face the way she'd done since he was small and sick, and the nights were very long. Both hands, I'm okay, I know. My chest is a little, I know. My bear is at the house. I know that too. Voice steady. That was the miracle of it. One of Mateo's men was already beside her with the portable nebulizer. Medication loaded. Mask ready. Clara took it herself and placed it over Danny's face herself. The way she'd done 10,000 times. Breathe, she said. He breathed. The room was quiet except for the hiss of the machine and the sound of men in the corridors outside, clearing the path. Is this the part? Danny said, voice muffled by the mask. Where we go home? This is the part where we go home. And then, she looked at him. Really looked. 17 years old, gray-faced and brave. And then, she said, we finish this. They brought him out the way they'd come in. Fast and clean. Mateo himself at Clara's shoulder the entire length of the corridor, his body angled between her and every possible threat, without appearing to think about it. Like a reflex. Like something trained so deep it had become structure. Danny made it to the vehicle. The door closed. Rosa was waiting at the estate and had refused to be anywhere else. Then Mateo's phone rang, Greco. He put it on speaker without hesitation. His eyes on Clara. You've taken something of mine, Greco said, smooth, unhurried. The voice of a man holding what he believed were all the remaining cards. You took something of mine first, Mateo said, and mine has a respiratory condition. A pause. Shorter than it should have been. A meeting, Greco said, tonight. The boathouse on the North River, 1 hour, 3 security each. You bring the documents, Mateo said. Silence. The silence of calculation. 1 hour, Greco said. Clara looked at Mateo when the call ended. He'll have more than 3 men. Yes, he'll have the documents. Yes, we go anyway. He looked at her, the cold air between them perfectly still. We go anyway, he said. The boathouse had been built for purpose and had outlasted the purpose by 30 years. Old wood, old rust. A single light hanging from the center beam, throwing amber shadow over everything. The smell of standing water and time. Clara told herself she had been in rooms more dangerous than this. She hadn't. But telling herself was doing something. Greco arrived on the exact hour, which meant he'd arrived before that. He walked in with 3 visible men, and Clara counted at least 2 more in the walls, 5 or 6. Against Mateo's 3 and her, fine. This was fine. Greco himself was exactly as she remembered. Silver-haired, distinguished, that expensive coat, those eyes that evaluated everything and committed to nothing. He looked at Mateo first, then at her, and smiled, Miss Ritchie. He settled into a chair like a man who believed he owned every room he entered. I wondered if Lombardi would bring you. I didn't give him a choice, she said. Sit then, both of you. Let's be civilized. They sat. Across a scarred table from the man whose father had burned her family to the ground, Clara laid her hands flat on the table surface, kept them there. Whatever happened, her hands would stay still. You have something that belongs to the Ritchie family, Mateo said. Greco placed a leather folder on the table, didn't push it across. Just let it sit in visible reach, a demonstration of control. Here it is. And you can't have it. What belonged to the Ritchie family was settled 30 years ago, he said, when a traitor paid the price for betrayal. Your father fabricated that evidence, Clara said. Antonio Ritchie was innocent. A claim without proof is simply noise, then let's discuss proof. He looked at her with the attention of a man who has just heard something he didn't expect. Not alarmed, not yet. Just recalibrating. The Zurich box was empty, he said. I know because I have what it contained. You do, she said. Then you have nothing. We have something else. The room went quiet. The kind of quiet that has mass. Your grandmother was thorough, Clara said, her voice level. Mateo beside her, still as a wall. She didn't survive 30 years by trusting one hiding place. Greco's expression shifted. The first crack in the absolute certainty. Small. But there is a second box, Clara said. In Geneva, a complete backup. Notarized copies, witness statements. A courier's testimony from 1992 that your father never knew existed. She watched him process it. The access to that box, she said, is coded inside a song. That only I know, silence, long and absolute. The water moving somewhere beneath the boards, the only sound in the world. You're bluffing, Greco said. Am I? She held his eyes. You want to bet 30 years of Ricci territories on that red? He looked at her for a long, long time. Bruno Greco was not a stupid man. He had survived 40 years in a world that ate stupid men without noticing. He could read a room. He could read a face. He could read the specific quality of silence that surrounds a bluff versus the quality that surrounds the truth. What he was reading now was not a bluff. "What do you want?" he said. The first sentence that hadn't come from a position of total control. "Recognition," Clara said. Formal acknowledgement that Antonio Ricci was innocent, that the accusations were fabricated, that the attack on the estate was unjust. In return, the Geneva documents stay sealed. "We don't pursue further territorial claims beyond what's rightfully ours. You'll release the Zurich documents to the family heads. They were deceived. They deserve the truth." A pause. "Not to the authorities. We have no interest in burning everything down. Only in clearing our name." Greco's eyes moved to Matteo. "And what does Lombardy want?" "The territories my father believed should never have been divided," Matteo said. "Restored to proper administration, plus the completion of a debt he carried to his grave." Another silence, different weight. The silence of arithmetic, a man calculating the cost of refusal against the cost of agreement. "If I refuse," Greco said. "Geneva," Clara said simply. Every family head, every journalist with interest in the Greco organization, every federal office that has been quietly curious for 2 decades, she let it sit. "Your father built an empire on a fabricated betrayal. That fabrication is now in the hands of the family that paid for it." He looked at her. She looked back, and she saw the moment he understood. Not that she was dangerous, not that she had leverage, but who she was, what she was. The granddaughter of a woman who had survived everything his family had thrown at her, who had carried the truth forward through 30 years and an ocean and 2 generations and a song. Some things don't break. They bend under the weight of everything pressed against them, and then, when the time comes, they straighten. "I want the Geneva location destroyed," he said. After verification, agreed, and Lombardy withdraws from the South Corridor. "Counter-offer," Matteo said. "Joint management. 4 years. Then review." Greco looked at him, looked at her. 4 years, he said, and Clara released a breath she had been holding for what felt like 3 days. They drove back through the dark, the city beginning to glow on the horizon. The particular exhaustion of people who have been running on adrenaline and are finally, slowly, decelerating towards something that might eventually resemble ordinary. "Geneva," Matteo said. "Is it real?" She looked at him. "Yes. You weren't bluffing?" "No." He was quiet for a moment. "When did you find it?" "The 4th song. An hour before midnight. Carmela hid it deeper than Zurich. I don't think she ever thought anyone would find it except someone who had sung those songs so many times that every wrong syllable felt wrong. Someone who loved them," he said. Without knowing why, she turned from the window, looked at him in the city light beginning to come through. "Someone who loved her," she said. The car moved through the brightening dark. "It's over," she said, trying the words. "It's beginning," he said. "There's a formal process, recognition, documentation, the properties in Sicily. You're very practical. Someone has to be," she almost smiled. "And what about us?" He looked at her. The face that Matteo Lombardi didn't show at galas or across boardroom tables or in rooms full of people measuring him. The face he made when it was just her. "There's a process for that too," he said quietly. "A slower one. If you want it." She looked at him for a moment. "I want it," she said, and the city came up around them, and the night finally let go of the dark. The DNA confirmation came back the following afternoon. She already knew. She'd known since the boathouse. Since before the boathouse, if she was honest with herself. She'd known since the moment Rosa had looked at her in the doorway of the estate and gone very still, seeing someone she hadn't expected to see again. But seeing it on paper, Clara Ricci. Direct descendant of Antonio and Carmela Ricci, the Ricci bloodline, which a fire in 1989 was supposed to have ended. Which had instead continued quietly in a restaurant kitchen in Queens, in the face of a woman who sang without knowing what she was singing, in the faces of 2 children who had grown up without knowing what their name had once been. Matteo sat across from her when she read it. "How do you feel?" he asked. She thought about it genuinely. The way she'd started doing when he asked. Instead of reaching for the automatic answer, "Like someone gave me a map," she said. "To a place I've been walking toward my whole life without knowing it had a name," he nodded. Like that was exactly right. Like he'd been waiting for her to find those particular words. "We should move quickly," he said. The announcement. "Before Greco reconsiders or finds new leverage." "Sicily," she said. "Yes, the estate. It was your family's home." Reclaiming it as the site of the announcement sends the right message. What message? That what was taken is being returned. That you are not hiding anymore, his eyes on hers. That you never needed to. She sat with that for a moment. And Danny? The best pulmonologist in Milan has already been contacted. He'll have a full evaluation scheduled by the time we land. A pause. If you consent? She almost laughed. Yes, she said. I consent. He reached into his jacket, took out a velvet box, opened it on the table between them. The sapphires. The same ones from the night of the party. The night she'd been a housekeeper in a job interview dress who didn't know her own name. I told you that night it wasn't a gift, he said. I was wrong. It was always meant to be. He looked at her. Clara, just her name, just the sound of it. Don't make a speech, she said. You're not good at speeches. I'm excellent at speeches. You're really not, Clara? Yes, she said. He looked at her. I haven't asked yet. You were going to. You can't know that, Matteo. A beat. 2, 3. Yes, he said. And that smile. The real one. The one that his face didn't quite know how to contain. That was the question. She reached across the table, took the necklace from the box herself, clasped it around her own throat this time. The weight of it settled against her collarbone. Familiar now. Like something that recognized where it was supposed to be. Rosa cried when they told her. Not with dignity. Not politely. She sat down in the kitchen and put her face in her hands and let 30 years of waiting come apart all at once, with her whole body. The way people cry when the thing they have been hoping for quietly for a very long time finally arrives. Clara sat beside her and held her hand. She would be so happy, Rosa kept saying. Carmela. She would be so happy. Tell me about her, Clara said. Tell me what she was like. Before, and Rosa told her, for 2 hours at the kitchen table. About a girl from Palermo who laughed too loud for a village that expected women to be quiet. Who sang constantly. Who argued with the priest because she thought he was wrong about several things and didn't see the logic of pretending otherwise. Who fell in love with Antonio Ricci at 16 and never looked at anyone else because she simply never needed to. Who had been the most alive person Rosa had ever known, and who had spent 30 years in Queens carrying that aliveness carefully. Tucked inside, for the sake of 2 children who didn't yet know they were worth hiding for. Clara listened to all of it and felt her grandmother, not as absence, not as loss, as presence. As something that had been inside her all along in the melody of songs she'd been singing since, before she could explain why. Danny received the news in his characteristic way. Which is to say, he sat completely still for 45 seconds and then said, So we're actual Sicilian royalty? It's not royalty, it's Clara. We're Sicilian royalty. It's a crime family, it's a completely different. With a villa in Palermo, the terminology is. And I get to drive the Lamborghini, she stared at him. Absolutely not, Clara. You are 17. I'm a Ricci heir. You're a minor with a pulmonary condition who is not driving a Lamborghini on Sicilian roads. He considered this with the expression of a man working the angles. The closed course on the estate, she looked at Matteo, who was standing in the doorway with the look of a man who understood he had made a tactical error at some point in the recent past, and was reviewing the sequence. We'll discuss it, Clara said. That means yes, Danny told Matteo, confidentially. Man to man, it means we'll discuss it, she said. She's been saying that since I was 4, Danny said. It means yes. Matteo looked between them, and for the first time, in what felt like a very long time, he laughed. Real. Unguarded. The sound of a man who had been holding himself carefully for so long that the release of it surprised even him. Clara watched it happen and thought, there it is. That's what Rosa meant. The part that didn't go all the way hard. The part that had been waiting for the right room to exist in. It had been here all along. They flew to Sicily 10 days later. The estate had been in Greco-controlled hands for 30 years. The legal transfer moved quickly. Men who wanted something resolved before reconsideration could arrive are capable of remarkable efficiency. The villa was still standing. The years showed in the stones and the gardens and the windows that wanted replacing. But the bones were good. The bones were very good. Clara stood on the steps where the photograph had been taken. The one from the portfolio. 20 people laughing in Sicilian sunlight, not knowing it was the last time. She stood where her grandmother had stood, where her mother had been held as a toddler reaching for the camera, where a family had gathered for the last time without knowing it was the last time. The sky above Palermo was exactly the same. That was the thing that undid her slightly. 30 years of everything changing, and the sky was still that particular blue, deep as the sapphires at her throat, Danny stood beside her, his breathing clearer already. The Milan specialist had been extraordinary, and the difference was audible. Audible in the ease of it. The absence of the labor she'd been listening to her whole life. "It's real," he said. "It's real," she agreed. "Carmela would have stood right here," he said, then stopped. She would have thought she was dreaming. "No," Clara said quietly. She would have known it was real, because she built it, note by note, song by song. For 30 years, she looked out at the Mediterranean, at the edge of the property, silver and ancient and entirely indifferent to human drama. This is exactly where it was always going. He put his arm around her shoulders. This almost man. This breathing disaster she had given everything for since he was a baby. "Thank you," he said, "for not running." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "You told me not to," she said. "I know. I'm very wise, you are. Don't let it go to your head." "I need the leverage," he laughed, and it was fine. Everything about this specific moment was simply fine. The formal gathering took place the following evening, the inner circle of the families. Men who had known the Ritchie name for 30 years only as a ghost story, who had built their arrangements on land taken through a fabricated betrayal, who now sat in the restored dining room of the Ritchie villa and looked at a 24-year-old woman from Chicago wearing her grandmother's sapphires and her grandmother's songs. Clara wore a dress she had chosen herself. Deep blue, simple. Nothing borrowed, nothing provided by anyone else's calculation of what she should be. She sat at the head of the table. Strange, correct, both true at once. Matteo sat to her right, not presiding, not managing, beside her. The difference was the whole thing. He understood it was the whole thing. That was, perhaps, the first thing she'd learned about him that was entirely certain. The men around the table were careful, evaluating. Some curious, some skeptical. One very old man at the far end, with hands like carved wood and eyes that had seen the original fire. He looked at her for a very long time. "You look like your grandmother," he said finally. "So I've been told. She was the most stubborn woman I ever knew. Also that she refused to be frightened of men who held rank over her." Clara met his gaze directly. "Is that a warning?" "No," he said, after a moment that had weight in it. "It's a welcome." The dinner went long. The documents from the Zurich box distributed, the testimony. The paper trail Dominic Greco had built, and which his son had spent 30 years reinforcing with smaller lies. Men who had believed a comfortable story for 3 decades sat in a room and heard a different one. A true one. That is not a small thing to ask of anyone. But they listened because the evidence was undeniable. Because the woman presenting it was calm and looked like someone who had always known this was where she was going, even when she hadn't. Because sometimes truth arrives with such clarity that the comfortable version simply has nowhere left to stand. And because Bruno Greco sat at the other end of the table. By invitation, by agreement, and said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. Because the thing his father had built in the dark was being examined in full light, and it could not survive that. When the formal acknowledgement was read, the family signed. Bruno Greco signed last. His hand was steady. She'd give him that. She watched him sign and felt not triumph, not satisfaction, exactly. Something quieter than both. The weight of something that had been carrying itself forward through time for 30 years. Through a song, through a woman's memory, through the hands of a girl who thought she was just the cleaning lady. Landing. Finally, where it had always been going, justice, the real kind. Slow and costly and completely certain. Later that night, after the families had gone, and Danny had fallen asleep in a room that had once been his great-grandmother's and Rosa's, had sat in the kitchen for a while, just listening to the house breathe. Clara stood on the balcony. The Mediterranean was invisible in the dark, but she could hear it. The sound the sea makes when it's very close and very old. A sound that has never needed to change because it was right the first time. Matteo came out without her hearing him, still moving like a shadow through spaces. Some things don't change. He stood beside her. Jacket off. Sleeves folded back. A glass of wine he wasn't really drinking. "How do you feel?" he said. She thought about it. Actually thought, like the story finally caught up to where I was standing, she said. Like I've been living one thing and understanding another thing, and tonight they're finally in the same place. He looked out at the dark where the sea was. "My father would have wanted to be here," he said. "He carried this for so long. Not knowing if it would ever," he stopped. "He died, not knowing if the people he helped had survived. If it had meant anything, it meant everything, Clara said. Yes. He looked at her. I'm beginning to understand that. She reached over and put her hand on his. On the railing, they didn't speak for a while. The sea going about its ancient business below them in the dark. I want to learn Italian, she said. I'll teach you. I want to understand the words, the actual words. In the songs, he was quiet for a moment. The first song, he said, is about coming home after a long journey, about the light in the harbor that tells you it's finally safe. He paused. The second is about a woman who keeps a secret in her heart until the right person comes to receive it. She looked at him. And the third? The third is about a daughter, he said, who doesn't know yet what she carries. How much her mother and her mother's mother put inside her, note by note, without ever explaining why. All the love that moves forward through blood and voice, and the way certain women hold their hands when they're listening. Clara was quiet for a long time. Then she sang the opening line of the first song, just the first line, softly. Into the dark above the sea and Matteo, who had not sung since he was a child, who had built an entire life out of silence and control, and the careful armor of a man who had decided early that nothing would be allowed in, finished it, his voice rough, uncertain. Completely there, she stared at him. My father, he said simply. On the nights he thought no one was listening, she turned back to the sea, her throat tight, and she felt them. All of them. Antonio and Carmela in their queen's kitchen, the radio playing songs from a home they'd left. Her mother as a small girl who never knew what she carried. Her mother as a woman who had died without being able to say what she'd known. The long line of people who had kept a name alive without understanding why the name mattered. All of them in this moment somehow, in the dark above the sea, in the note still hanging in the air. Thank you, she said. For what? For hearing me the first time in the penthouse. When I was just the woman who cleaned your windows. He turned to look at her, the actual expression on his face, without the armor, without the calculation. You were never just anything, he said. You were the most complete person I had encountered in 10 years. I knew it the moment I heard you. Before I understood a single reason why, she looked at him. You're getting better at speeches, she said. I've been practicing. In your head constantly. She laughed, softly, into the dark. He reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture of someone who has wanted to do it for a long time and has finally run out of reasons not to. This is just the beginning, he said. There will be difficulties. People who won't accept the restoration. Complications that, Matteo, yes, stop talking, a beat. 2, yes, he said, and he kissed her. On a balcony above a sea she couldn't see, with Sicily breathing dark and ancient around them, and 30 years of someone else's story reaching its end and their own beginning. The sapphires caught what little light there was. The same ones that had rested against her collarbone on the night she'd been a housekeeper in a borrowed dress, who hadn't known what her own name meant. She knew now. And somewhere in the garden below, in the warm dark, among the restored fountain and the lights wound through the old stone walls, the night settled around the villa like a thing that had been waiting for this, like a house that had been holding its breath for 30 years and had finally been given permission to exhale, because some names carry too much weight to be burned away, because some songs know exactly where they're going before the singer understands she's been traveling, because a woman from Palermo taught her granddaughter a melody in a kitchen in Queens and didn't explain a single word of it and trusted, with everything she had, that the right moment would come. And the granddaughter had hummed it against a cold window, 60 floors above a city that had never heard the Ritchie name, until a man who moved like a shadow had stopped and turned and listened, and for the first time in a very long time, recognized the sound of something he had been missing without knowing it had a name.